And welcome back, everybody, to the Big Blue in the Bronx YouTube channel. Hope you guys are doing well. Hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you know when a live stream pops or a video drops. We are down here once again for the Reese's Senior Bowl, the second year in a row that we're down here. I got Luca alongside me for day one recap, but first, before we go into anything, what are your takeaways from today's experience, as well as yesterday's experience at the press conference and getting to ask Jalen Milroe a question?
Well, first of all, it's been a lot of fun. You know, obviously last year was a lot of fun. This year's going to be a lot of fun. It was great first 2 days for me, as you mentioned, that I formally asked Jalen Milroe a question. It's great to ask the question, put myself out there a little bit. Just recognizing people who we connected with from last year is also good as well. In terms of the practices, it was obviously fun to just sit out there and watch and scout and freelance and do all that kind of stuff. So just really getting back into the group what we did last year is a lot of fun.
Okay, so national team, then American team. I covered the trenches today. You covered the wide receivers and the defensive backs. Before I get into the trenches, which matters a lot, what did you see from the wide receivers and the defensive backs today?
Well, I thought the wide receivers won the day. There were guys like Jalen Noel out of Iowa State. You had Xavier Restrepo. You had Tez Johnson, who I thought performed the best out of all the wide receivers for the national team today. It was the wide receivers day. I thought there were some corners who struggled a little bit. I liked how Dorian Strong practiced, but I was surprised at guys like Darian Porter who were just getting beat, whether it was by tight ends or wide receivers. Overall, it was the wide receivers day. If I had to make a few notables, as I said, Jalen Noel, Tez Johnson, Xavier Restrepo, I think stole the day. And also Jaden Higgins had a nice grab or two, but he did have a few drop problems.
Okay, yeah, that's not great overall. You said a couple of tight ends beat defensive backs. I think one of them, who's a guy I'm not really that high on, more of a receiving threat, is Terrence Ferguson.
Mm-hmm. It was Terrence Ferguson. I think he was running a bit of like a corner route. He was up on the right side, but I think it was like Aljersma, the Canadian quarterback, who was dropping back in the pocket. And when he was going off of his stem, he made a quick pivot move from inside to outside, really good juke move, and the defender just fell flat on his feet. So he's very flat-footed, left there. And when he got out to the right, Ferguson was just wide open. Couldn't have missed him right there.
Now, before we get to the O-line, I know I keep delaying it, but from what you saw, and I think also what Brian saw, is like the quarterbacks didn't really stick out on the national side. Now, the more talent is to the American side. I think everybody knows that with Riley Leonard, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, from what I saw, Gabriel was the best quarterback, but that doesn't really scream too many compliments because everyone was just settling in. I know you said and Brian said that Aljersma, who's the Canadian quarterback, was overthrowing a couple of different guys and having trouble.
Yeah, well, you got to understand, the Canadian field is actually 120 yards long, as opposed to the NFL field, college field, it's 100 yards. So it's a plus and a negative for Aljersma. When he's adjusting to the NFL level, he has a ton of arm strength. We saw that today. But sometimes he has to just reel it in, and he has to learn how to better place the ball into his receivers. Now, there were flashes of that today, but there were also flashes of him overthrowing the ball. So it's a matter of control, it's a matter of zip, it's a matter of ball placement.
Yeah, of course. So moving to the trenches, which is really where I specialize most of the time, and I spent a lot of time specializing in the trenches last year. There were multiple guys. In my opinion, it was more of a balance on the national side than the American side between O-line and D-line winning. Right, Landon Jackson was one of the first guys that popped off the page to me, going up against a couple of different guys and winning his battles. Aeneas Peoples, even in 11-on-11s, was winning his battles in the running game. He was in the backfield early, had some nice reps on one-on-ones, but he really stood out in those 11-on-11s. I know Brian, our guy, he scouted him. He's 6'1", which is like it's a knock on him.
It's an anomaly.
It's a knock
for most
on him.
defensive linemen.
Yeah, his size is not great, but the way he was working today, and I noticed that a lot of guys with disadvantages today played really well, and we'll get to that, of course. But I thought mostly in terms of the guys that won, it was mostly O-line, but again, there was more of a balance because you had Peoples, you had Landon Jackson, Josh Joyner, who's a guy I'm not really too much of a fan of, probably about third, fourth round pick. In the film I watched from Minnesota, I just wasn't a fan. personally of the production. Maybe I'm different than other people. Josiah Stewart was constantly in the backfield. He set the edge on a particular run play to the left side when they were running it in the 11-on-11 drills. He was bending the edge really well against the offensive tackles. I think, don't get me quoted on this, I believe he beat Josh Connerly one time, and he's a guy that could possibly slip into the first round. But guys that did really well today on the offensive line, you had Josh Connerly, who started out rough. He started out a little rough, but he got better as the practice went on. Wyatt Millum, he was a guy that struggled for first 1 or 2 reps, and then him and Yaya Black almost got into a scrum because he was just anchoring. He was, he had a nice little hop step. He was doing his thing, and them two were just shoving each other a little bit afterward. You scouted Millum. What can you tell us?
Yes, I did. Millum's he's a physical specimen. He played both left tackle and right tackle over at West Virginia. I project him to be a second-round starter. He is that good. As I said, big physical specimen, especially really good in the run game. He's got good pass sets. I think he needs to do better a little bit with bending and really figuring out that balance. But otherwise, he just plays with such a great mean streak that I think a lot of offenses would love, a lot of offensive lines would love for them to set the tone. But you also spoke about, players with certain disadvantages or certain stigmas. You mentioned Ananias Peebles, who was 6'1". Now, I just want to reflect back. Tez Johnson, who I think they officially did the measurables for the Senior Bowl, I think he was listed like 5'10 or 5'9".
5'10", 165.
But he played very well. That's what it goes without saying. Just wanted to make that note.
Yeah. One guy that everybody is talking about, and he was a guy I loved when we were doing these scouting reports. And obviously we're still kind of finishing him up because we want to get as many out there as possible. It's Gray Zabel. Mm-hmm. Zabel comes from a program that's a smaller school, but is consistent with producing NFL offensive linemen. Cody Mock came from North Dakota State. Mm-hmm. There's a couple others you can name, came from North Dakota State University.
Christian Watson?
Well, I mean, yes, but I'm talking specifically in terms of O-linemen. You're not wrong there. Zabel played all 5 positions, and he was one of the guys, right? Not a lot of people knew him. Some people did, whatever. Came into this process coming from a smaller school, again. And he was the most consistent player, most consistent offensive lineman of the day. He was winning almost every rep. And that's remarkable. Again, small school, but it does produce NFL talent. So I just wanted to make that note. Gray Zabel, second, third-round pick, probably a second at this point, and he played all 5 positions in college.
Wow.
So if you're a team like the Patriots or this team or that team, you need O-line depth, Gray Zabel's there. He was spending most of his time at left and right guard. So, again, he could play multiple spots. As far as the bad, I will also say Caleb Rogers from, I believe it was Texas Tech. He had a good day today. Outside of when he played center, there was some really bad snaps. In terms of the bad in like the trench area, wasn't really a big fan of Jonah Monheim, which I kind of expected a little bit. Wasn't a big fan of his tape at USC. Few bad reps, got thrown to the ground a few times. Not great reps at center. Him and Dalen Gabriel were not on the same page at the start of practice. And at the start of practice, too, I just thought I'd make this note. They were actually a little undisciplined, and of course, you're going to have that. Mm-hmm. There were a couple offsides penalties, a couple of false start penalties. I want to move over to the American side. Did you see anyone in particular from the American side, wide receivers, DBs, or anyone in general, position-wise, doesn't matter, that impressed you?
Well, for the American side as opposed to the national side, I actually was seeing the trenches like you were for the national side. I thought the defensive line won the day. Now, obviously, you'll give your take on that. I thought Walter Nolan did very well. I thought Shamar Stewart, he's one of my favorites. The biggest knock on him is he didn't give a lot of production in college. Only 4.5 sacks throughout his collegiate career at Texas A&M. He had 1.5 sacks this prior season, but you could just see that the raw talent is there. And to me, just watching the film, he creates a lot of lanes for guys because he's double teamed so often. So it frees up rush so it frees up rushes for other players in the defensive line, creating those advantages. And you want an advantage creator on that defensive line. In terms of other guys, you had Cameron Jackson from Florida, who was also a guy who really impressed. I didn't even know who he was, but he was just taking defenders to school. You also had Deion Walker out of Kentucky, really performing well in those drills. I would say one-on-ones, not to mention he completely just bulldozed one of his coaches when they were working with the pads. So I thought the defensive line won the day, and that's what I got to say about that.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. I, again, specialized in the defensive line, O-line matchups, and that was where it was really uneven. I'm going to say that right now. It was uneven. Deion Walker, you mentioned, he's a guy that needs to really refine his hand technique. I will say that much. He's a big guy. He's got a lot of pass rush upside, though. He did have a few nice reps, but there were reps where, like, for instance, a guy we're going to talk about is Willie Lampkin. He took him to school. Lampkin took Walker to school, which, if you look at those two frames, you would not expect. Mm-hmm. But Walker had a very nice rep against Dillinger. Not a big fan of his. Walter Nolan, he's a guy that was supposed to be not coming to the Senior Bowl, then came to the Senior Bowl. It was like a flip-flop about reports, but nonetheless, he's a projected first-round pick. He was dominating guys. Clay Webb, out of one of the smaller schools. It's not Sacramento State, but it is one of the smaller schools. Again, it's missing me at the top of my mind. He was one who got taken to school by Walter Nolan. R.J. Oben,
he had a big day
He's
as well.
a guy, yeah. He had a big day. You got to interview him. He torched Emory Jones on one of the reps. Cameron Jackson, he, as you mentioned, had a big day. Willie Lampkin, we'll talk about in a sec. Omar Norman Lott. Everyone we talked to after the American practice at least brought him up once. So
in some mock drafts, he's like a early second, late first round pick. That's how highly thought of he is.
Yeah. And as far as the O-line, like one of the only winners I could give is Willie Lampkin. And I can't even give him full 100% credit. I mean, last night, as I told you, we were watching Lampkin. And I'm like, okay, let's see what this guy's size, his measurements are. Before the Senior Bowl, he was at 5'11", 2-something, almost 300. And then when Senior Bowl measured him, he was at 5'10", 270. Guards are usually 300, 310, 320.
They're also a lot taller.
They're also a lot taller, as Lucas says. And there were a few times, as mentioned with the Cameron Jackson rep, right? He was getting absorbed. He was not having a fun day. But second half of practice, like a lot of people have caught on Twitter, Willie Lampkin dominated Deion Walker. And that's big because that's not just, it's SEC talent. Deion Walker is a mammoth of a man. He's like 6'6", 6'7". Yeah, he does have some issues with his pass rushing technique and playing too tall. But at the end of the day, you play who you play, and it bumps Lampkin's draft stock.
Absolutely, and Lampkin, I think just by what you mentioned alone, having a rough practice start, and then eventually making those adjustments, that's being coachable, and that's preparing yourself to make those adjustments. Say, you know what, I need to do this better, and it's a good self-realization. I know it's not a huge thing with a player like a certain skill, but you know what, making those adjustments as a player, especially against like players as you mentioned, like Deion Walker, who are significantly more advantaged from an intangible standpoint. It's really good on Lampkin, and I'm glad that he finished the second half of practice on a high note.
Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I really like if you want me to be honest, I like the national practice more. I thought it was more even keeled. The American practice I thought was more defensive minded, or I should say the defensive driven. Defensive driven won the day, defensive line, and they're a lot low key. But I can't wait for the rest of the practices. It's been a good start. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far.
Yeah, be sure to check out the interview with me and projected first-round pick Trey Amos. Luke obviously interviewed Dan Jackson, defensive back from Georgia, as long as edge rusher from Notre Dame, R.J. Oben. After this, there's going to be a couple of clips that we took from practice today off of my iPhone, one-on-one reps, 11 on 11, stuff like that. So be sure to check it out. Check out the Twitter too, because if you want stuff like that in real time, I'm live tweeting from the stadium. I'm live video clipping from the stadium. So a lot of fun here. It doesn't stop. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Again, do all the good stuff. Use that SeatGeek code, $20 off your online order with the promo code Big Blue in the Bronx. We appreciate you guys, and we will see you for the Day 2 recap and more interviews. Peace out.
Directing what they're doing.
Lindenberg.
Lindenberg's directing what's going on.
He was the signal caller in Minnesota.
Yeah, he's a signal caller here too.
One thing. So I was talking to my the group of guys down there, and they were talking with Josh Farmer's brother, and they said that the Giants interviewed Josh Farmer. They said they made it like an interrogation.
Of course they did. Ooh, contact. Are we going back
Sir? Yeah.
Nice swing from camera guys.